Hi guys, Ricky Pope here, and this week on the Christian Nerd Tonight podcast, I'm joined by author and apologist Abdu Murray of embracethetruth.org. We talk about artificial intelligence and several other things, plus scripture and nerdy news, and we'll get to all of that right after this. It's great to be back on the show. Been off for a few weeks. Sorry for those who have been looking forward to some new content. You guys know I love sharing Jesus and my nerdiness with you every week. And as you know, I'm part of the Christian Nerd HQ podcast network. Make sure you check out all the great podcasts over there. And we have something new coming soon. Go to christiannerdhq.com for links. Now let's read some scripture. Revelation 7, 9 through 10. Now here, John is sharing from a series of visions that he was given. After this, I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, "Salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb." Some translations say every nation, tribe, and tongue. My guest this week kind of exemplifies that. He comes from a Muslim background and went on a journey to explore faith on the internet and became a Christian believer. Every day, people are asking spiritual questions in search engines and social media. My ministry work revolves around this very idea, connecting with these people who are open spiritually through digital systems, then meeting them face to face to share Jesus with them. Pray this week that the ministry teams I work with will get in front of spiritual seekers and have the opportunity to share Jesus with them. Now for some nerdy news. Lots of trailers have been dropping lately. Here's some of the most recent ones. Gundam Requiem for Vengeance is coming to Netflix, and it's going to be a return to the 1-year war time period. Beetlejuice, the sequel to the original Beetlejuice, brings Michael Keaton, Winona Ryder, and Tim Burton back together and adds Jenna Ortega to the cast. A very short trailer, more like a teaser, but it feels much like the original. And Alien Romulus returns to the space horror genre, feeling more like the original Alien film than the action movie that was Aliens, the second movie, or the more straightforward sci-fi that was Prometheus. Scarlett Johansson may be returning to the nerd movie scene. She's currently in talks with Universal to join the new Jurassic World film, currently slated to be in theaters July of 2025. The script is being written by David Kopp, who wrote the original 1993 script. Although The Hollywood Reporter simply says she's in talks to appear, some outlets say she will be the lead. This could be a great movie. In our interview today, I talk with author and apologist Abdu Murray of embracethetruth.org, and we talk a lot about artificial intelligence. Let's get right into our interview. Abdu Murray, it is great to have you on the Christian Nerd Unite podcast today.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Ricky. Really appreciate it.
So, I got introduced to you. I received some information about you and about some of the things that you do. But before we really get into it, and I know today we're mostly going to talk about AI and faith and how that, how we need to think about that as believers. But give our audience just a quick background. Who's Abdu and why might they have heard of you before?
Yeah, thanks for asking. And so one of the questions I often get is the Abdu and the Murray. What's the deal with the Lebanese but also Scottish name? And so when we came over to the United States, our name is really pronounced Murray. So when we came over, they said, "What's your last name?" And we said Murray, and they said, "That sounds like a Scottish guy saying Murray." So it's a Scottish last name, so I suddenly became half Scottish, even though I'm not. Um, but I was, by way of background, I was raised as a Muslim. I found the credibility of the Christian faith through apologetics to be compelling intellectually and emotionally and existentially. And after a 9-year journey into looking at various worldviews, I became a believer in the year 2000 from a Muslim background. Since then, I'm trained as a lawyer. So I went to law school, was a partner at 2 different law firms, and did apologetics and ministry on the side for a long time. But then ministry opportunities grew and grew. And so what we do as a ministry is our mission is to offer the credibility of the gospel to every questioner we encounter. And we're very specific in how we say that, because what we're trying to do is we're not here to answer questions. We speak at universities, we do open forums, debates, dialogues. Just did a dialogue with an atheist, and as part of a dialogue with the Free Thought Society over in Philadelphia. But even then, we're not answering questions, we're answering people, because we fundamentally believe that questions don't need answers, but people do, and they use their questions to get them. So that's the gist of what Embrace the Truth, the ministry that I founded, does. So we go all over the world, and we speak at churches as well, but secular venues, academic institutions, businesses, and these kind of things, to offer the credibility of the gospel to people who are interested in the life of the mind. Which is why I'm excited to be on your show, Ricky, because this is the nerd podcast. So you guys think about a lot of stuff too. So thanks for having me on.
Definitely, we definitely do. So I invited you on to talk a little bit about AI, and I'm super fascinated with this idea. And I'm specifically fascinated with the idea of how can ministries use AI effectively, and should they use AI? That's a big question for some people. For some people, AI is, the devil, and for some people, AI is a miracle. But what's kind of your take on AI? What is it? Why is it? And what kind of uses do you see for it?
Yeah. So I think of AI in 2 ways. I think of it as both a hammer and a handgun. I think it can be a wonderful tool to build incredible things. And I think it's also dangerous enough that we have to respect it and make sure that we handle it appropriately. I think it's neither the devil nor the savior. And this is actually in contrast to 2 polar opposites. You have a religious paradigm that tends to be very skeptical of technology, not because they're Luddites and backwards people, but because I think there's a recognition in the Christian faith that tools can become their own idols. And we can start to use these things and atrophy our God-given abilities, oftentimes in favor of the ease that a tool provides. But they can be wonderful tools. I mean, the things that AI is doing outside of ministry, like diagnosing things and analyzing problems that would take us hours and hours to analyze, but it frees us up from delving into the minutia of something to getting into the big ideas and being as creative as possible. There's so many positive applications for it in the world in general. But there's also a dangerous thing on a number of levels. One of which I think is how I look at it is AI has the ability, not itself, but it has the ability to become a tool where ideas of truth and reality start to blur with the advent of deep fakes, whether they're audio deep fakes or video deep fakes. With the scams that happen in terms of, I know someone personally who got called by an AI and impersonated one of his relatives because of a voice sampling, and asked him for his credit card information so he could get out of a jam. And it was so convincing. It was only by God's grace that basically this person kind of said, "Hey, here's a question for you," and it didn't know the answer, and so he figured out it was a scam. So there's a lot of danger to it, but there's so much benefit to it as well. So like anything, I think we can be glad and glory in God's goodness in giving us the intuition and the ingenuity to create a wonderful thing and to be able to do these kind of things, which sets us apart.
Mm.
You know, we are endowed with God's image. We are branded with God's image. We are made in God's image and after His likeness, and which makes us different and I think of a higher order than chimpanzees and porpoises and these kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
Because as wonderful and beautiful as those things themselves are, and as advanced of animals as they are, they don't sit around wondering what the rings of Saturn are made of. They don't sit around wondering whether or not I can get this inanimate thing to actually start solving problems. They don't do that, but it's our capacity to wonder. So in one sense, AI is a testimony to God's goodness in our lives. In another sense, we have to be careful because AI can be used as a tool by the propensity for human sin, which is to become the God of God, which is the original sin. So we have to be careful of those two things.
Well, what do you think if there was one, like in a ministry setting, let's take a ministry setting.
Mm-hmm.
If there's, one or two or three things that you think of that right now, the way AI is now, honestly, AI is growing so fast. It's got so many new features every day. But in general, right now, the way it exists, what do you think are maybe some of the two or three best uses for ministries right now for AI?
Well, I think, gosh, there's, where does one start? There's so many good applications and some of them are small and some of them are macro. I'll tell you one where by contrast, is one where I don't like it being used often in terms of the writing of sermons, because you could ask it right now, go to ChatGPT and say, write me a sermon on man's sin and God's grace from using Romans chapter 1 and 2 as paradigmatic examples. And it'll give you something, and it's fairly good.
Yeah.
It's
a little scary.
It is a little scary, right? So I don't think that's a good use. But if you were to say, summarize for me the best thinking on the interpretation of Romans 1 verses thus and such through thus and such from a Calvinistic perspective or from an Arminian perspective, it will do that for you. And the thing that would have taken you hours, you can have a great starting point to be able to delve into the scripture without spending 6 hours getting started. That doesn't mean you shouldn't put in the hard work of the study yourself.
Right.
It means that it can help get you started. So that's one thing. I think in reaching youth and young people, the ability to use it digitally and to create video and edit and interact with things right away in a way that's relevant to them, using AI as a guide and a helper, is tremendous, because it takes a lot of effort to do that stuff. And on shoestring budgets, I mean, do I recommend getting someone who actually knows how to make video and do this kind of stuff? Yeah. The answer is yeah. We just hired somebody who can do that. But if your budget is low and you really can't go there, it's not the substitute for a human being doing it, but it's pretty good. And you can have really effective youth ministry using artificial intelligence. I think it's great for research, and I think it's great for helping you get a message out in a compelling way and in a cost-effective way. One other application for AI, this is a semi-application because it's actually a lesson learned about AI, is to actually use it. As an apologetics organization, we're always talking about the credibility, the message of the Christian faith. And one of the things AI does, because there's been some skeptical arguments against the Christian faith that say, look, you claim that we're made in God's image because we think, because we have rationality, because we can solve problems, because we can analyze issues and do these things. And we need God to justify that belief. But we're not God, and we just made something that actually does these things better than we do. So really, do we need God for mind? For the existence of our minds? Do we really need a God? Are we special, or are we just like AI? Are we just basically sophisticated biochemical machines? And that's something that I think is creeping in. People are actually worried about that. I think that argument is starting to hold sway with some young folks. I think the existence of AI actually goes the opposite direction. I think that you can use AI's existence to actually prove God's existence, because AI did not result from mindless, blind chance. It resulted from years of our finest minds working hard to understand the human mind, and then creating a simulacrum, which still isn't as good as our minds. And so, frankly, no matter how good AI gets, it's still the result of divine intelligence. Of designed intelligence or designing intelligence. So it actually proves that if we are the creator, we needed a creator ourselves, and that has to be an ultimate mind. To quote Rosalind Picard, who is a MIT professor I met with recently, who's a Christian and at MIT leading a team in the lab of breakthroughs in AI for applications for people with disabilities and seizures and these kind of things. She said, the more I study how the mind actually works and applying it to computers, the more in awe of the divine mind I actually am. So it's got practical implications, but it also has some life lessons for us.
Awesome. Well, I had mentioned to you before that we started the show that one of my ministry jobs, one of the things I do is I help ministries with marketing, running ads and things like that. One of the things that I have been using AI for is when I'm working with these ministry teams overseas, often in developing countries where they don't have necessarily the funds or the ability to do everything they need to be able to do. So we're helping them. So one of the things I run across is as we're creating ads, they want to run an ad that says this specific thing, and we need a specific image to sell that idea. So one of the things I've been using with AI is to take that idea that they want for this ad and having it generate images for the ad that are very, very tied in to the idea that they want to communicate. And I've seen that be really, really effective. One of the things, like recently we were running an ad and they were like, it would be great if we had a picture of a man reading the Bible, and but he needs to, because we looked at all of all the stock images places, and we just weren't finding exactly what they wanted. He's like, they don't look enough like us. They look, they look too either too Western, or they look too Egyptian, or they're African, but they're not our African. So I actually typed in, I said, I typed in something like, create an image of a Nigerian man that is from the Hausa tribe. That was the tribe we're working with. And that is in a dark room holding a book that has, that has light glowing from the book. And like illuminating him from the book, and because that's what they had communicated to me, and I spent, I don't know, probably 30 minutes working through the prompt to get this the way I wanted. And when it finally came out, we had 2 or 3 images that we thought really worked well, but it was a process, and I always think when people are like, AI is amazing. AI is, does all these amazing things for you. I start looking at prompt writing. And if you've investigated, have you done much investigating in prompt writing?
I have done some, but it's actually it's in process. It's developing my investigating into this. So I'm curious what you're going to say next.
Well, there is definitely an art and a science to writing a prompt that works well, that gets what you want.
Yeah.
And that's something that I have seen. So when we talk about, it's this miracle thing that generates anything you want within reason. And if you can write a prompt that works well, that really communicates what you're trying to get at. So when you talked about, write me a sermon on this, I've seen things like that where it's like that actually is a pretty good sermon, but then I go, but that's not exactly the point I want to get across. Right. So that means I need to go back and rewrite the prompt. So one of the things I see for AI is that we as believers and as we are working with AI, we have to learn the art and the science of prompt writing for it to actually generate the appropriate responses that we're looking for. So anyway, it's an interesting thought that came
Well,
across.
what you're hitting on to me is you can't ever lose the human element. And I think one of the penchant of human beings sometimes is to let the machines do our thinking for us as much as possible. And what you're suggesting is that you have to be careful with this. And I think that, one of the things I value what you just said is that you're not settling for what it gives you so that it's the easy way out. You're willing to take the time it takes to do it. But you have to. So, because one of the things that I think is part of the human condition is that we are path of least resistance creatures. So there was Tomas Chmiry-Pramusic, who is a AI researcher, but in the field in the sense of work psychology. He basically talked about how if we're not careful, we will end up ceding our humanity to the algorithms. And what he means by that, he gives a classic example of, Netflix telling you, I think you'd like this. Why don't you watch this movie? Or the YouTube, things you might like on the side when you watch it, and suddenly you find yourself in this YouTube black hole because you keep on clicking. Yeah, I'd like to watch that. Absolutely. He says, what's interesting about that is that when you watch the behavior of this prediction machine, because that's machine learning, it's not AI in the sense, because, as you know, AI's got a broad definition and the term is almost useless unless you define it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So in the machine learning aspect of it with these predictive algorithms, what you end up doing is you become more machine-like. It says, you might like this. And what you do is click, yes. And so you become robotic.
Yeah.
So we have to be careful not to cede our humanity to the machines, to the algorithm. And so when we do this kind of work with like doing this tremendous work where you're getting a very soulish message, the gospel message, a soulless message to people, that you have to be on top of it because you don't want the image to be robotic.
Yeah.
So you have to stay on top of the AI. But this does remind me of something, and this is the part where I get a little fascinated in terms of the human nature behind this whole thing, is what got me fascinated with AI in the first place. It was partly I'm just a nerd. I'm a sci-fi guy.
Awesome.
I love everything sci-fi. Yep. And I don't think that the machines are coming for us. The worry I have, there's this great quote, by the way, by Alison Gropnik, and she said, natural stupidity can wreak far more havoc than artificial intelligence. I think she's right, because we can use artificial intelligence to hurt ourselves, but the intelligence itself probably won't do the thing to us.
Yeah.
But if we cede our humanity to it, that's my worry. So there's a story that got me fascinated with AI in real, earnest, was the story of, and maybe you remember this, a few years ago, a guy named Jason Allen won a digital art contest, and he did it using Midjourney. And so he just wrote a bunch of prompts, and it generated, through some massaging of his doing, it generated this beautiful image, and it is quite a beautiful image. And a lot of the artists, and I dabble in digital art. I have an iPad, I have a light pen, or the Apple Pencil. I mess around with it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call myself an artist. I'm a dabbler. But I recognize that there still is a level of skill between applying what is the image in your head, even if you're looking at something as a model. You got to take that, put it in here, and then translate it to your hand, whether it's sculpting, painting, whatever. And a lot of the artists were like, hey, wait, that's cheating. And he ended up getting to keep his first prize. And he had a statement at the end that I thought was fascinating. It's in the New York Times when he was defending his use of Midjourney. This is what he said. I find it so fascinating. He said, look, it's over. Art is dead. AI won. Humans lost. And I'm like, this is an artist talking. Like, he's bragging about it. So my issue, like I said before, is I don't think AI is the problem. It's why do people love it like it's the savior? Here's my guess. You take the Garden of Eden story. This is why I love the Bible so much, because it speaks to our modern issues, even though it's an ancient book.
Oh, absolutely.
You take this ancient story about Adam and Eve, and they were planted in the garden in order to be with God. He walks and talks with them in the cool of the day, the Bible says. And they're given this one rule: just don't eat this one fruit.
Hmm.
And they decide they want to be the sovereign over God, because the serpent comes along and says, did God really say? And he kind
Yeah.
of misquotes God, and then they misquote God back, and they added a rule. Don't even, we can't even touch it. Well, God never said don't touch it. He just said don't eat it. And so they added something to God, which means they wanted to be the sovereign over God. So that's our human penchant. That's the original sin, is the desire to be the sovereign over the sovereign. Now, if you think about this, philosophically speaking, God can do anything except that which is logically impossible or self-contradictory to himself. So he's not a liar, because he is the truth.
Hmm.
He can't create a perfect being. He can incarnate in the Son and be the perfect human, but the Son pre-exists. God the Son pre-exists. So he can't create a perfect being, because a perfect being wouldn't need to be created. A perfect being would not need anything. And if you were created, then you would need a creator. And so he can't create an uncreated thing. That's ridiculous. So God creates us in his image and his likeness. And therefore that means that we have the spark of the divine in us, but we're not divine.
Hmm.
We come along and we create this thing. We call it artificial intelligence, whether it's AGI or ASI or machine learning, whatever. And it starts to do better than us in some ways, like art. Well, at least it seems like it's doing better art than us. It writes poetry, it writes books, it does all these things. And we brag about it. We brag about its ability to make us obsolete, as if this is a good thing. And I was wondering, my biggest issue was, why is he bragging? And then it suddenly occurred to me, that's how you become the sovereign of the sovereign, is God can't make a being equal to him or greater, but we can. And somehow we've outdone God. We're in that digital Garden of Eden. So my message essentially is this: with artificial intelligence, recognize it for what it is. It is not as sophisticated as you or I is. It can do certain calculations way better than we can. But it is a tool to be used by us. We are in our digital Garden of Eden right now, and we are being tempted with the fruit. But we have guidance now. We're not like Adam and Eve, where we didn't see the future coming, even though God warned us. But we have the past of what social media did. And now we have that wisdom with which we can guide ourselves with AI. And if we use it, and I think have the gospel message as our backbone, I think we'll be able to use this tool just fine.
Now, you've mentioned social media a couple of times. How do you feel like social media has been an issue in that sense?
Yeah. So I think with the machine learning that's behind social media, I mean, there's a reason. I think part of it is that it's created this polarization effect. And I realize I'm borrowing some of these ideas from The Social Dilemma, that Netflix documentary that was made by a lot of the developers of social media and the algorithms that pertain to it. But look, I mean, right now, my phone is within earshot of me, and I can talk about a couple of products right now that you and I would like to see or buy, and it'll give me an ad that I didn't look for based on that. What it's doing is the algorithm is learning my patterns, and it's predicting the things that I do, and it's predicting the videos I linger over. I mean, one thing that shocked me was the algorithms can be so sophisticated that, let's say my favorite color is orange. It's not, but let's say it is. And I flip through videos, and orange catches my eye in various videos. And let's say they're completely wildly different videos. The AI will pick up, hey, he tends to linger 1.2 seconds longer on a video that contains orange. And it'll know that, and it'll predict it. Now think of it, now project that onto the politics, project that onto the ideologies, project that onto these things, and it'll start to feed you things that you like. And pretty soon, with your 1,575 friends you've never met, or 10,000 or whatever, you think everyone thinks like you. And so when someone challenges your view, well, they must clearly be a wacko because everyone thinks like me. And that creates polarization. I also think it creates body issues with young people, especially young girls, where you're with the filters and the way the AI gets. I mean, right now, I mean, it was sort of comical, when filters first came out, it was sort of the silly thing. You could actually outpace it. I could run from the filter, and the clown face that I put would actually be behind me. Now the thing tracks you really well. And you can completely, in fact, the program I'm using right now to project the image onto the camera I'm looking at right now can make me look thinner. I can promise you I didn't. I'm stuck with this face, and I don't want to. I got a face for radio, but here I am on video. It can create this false sense of what's real. So I think the machine learning behind social media can cause us to not be able to trust our own eyes and our own ears and our own senses. And so what I worry about is what Asa Raskin and Tristan Harris called reality collapse, that through the manipulation of the digital, and we spend so much time in the digital space, that we will lose touch with what it means for something to be real. And I know you and I both, from our talk before we started the show, was believe in the reality and the necessity and the depth and the beauty of personal interaction.
Yes.
I do worry a little bit that social media has gotten us to not be able to even trust that kind of thing.
And I think what you were just describing, I think is a huge issue. And I think it's such a huge issue because people don't understand that.
Yeah.
What I have, I'm a proponent of something, and I'm convinced that it can work, but I'm not, I'm convinced it'll work because it was my idea. I'll be honest.
It's a great reason.
I am. I could be wrong, but I think I'm right. Here's something I have seen, and I feel like I see it over and over again, is that you were describing the algorithm learns us. Now, if we understand that as individuals, if we take responsibility for that, we can turn the tables and train the algorithm the other way. Yeah. And I tell people this all the time. People will be like, man, I don't know why I see such horrible stuff on social media all the time. And I ask, okay, so you see all this, horrible stuff. Do you click on it? Do you put a mad face when you see it? Do you comment and say, this is horrible? That's why you see it. And especially on Facebook goes, oh, this person will interact with this kind of content. I'll give them more of it.
Yeah.
So when they see more of it, they comment more about how horrible it is. Yeah. And Facebook goes, oh, they like this. They like interacting with this kind of content. I'll give them more of it. Even though when, the individual is thinking, I am putting negative comments on this post. But as far as the algorithm is concerned, they don't care whether it's negative or positive. They just care that you interact with it. So they're going to give you more of it. So I am convinced that if we as individuals will take that responsibility and go, when I see something negative that I no longer want to see on my feed, I can't interact with it at all. I need to simply scroll on. And when I see something that I do want to see more of in my feed, I need to click it, like it, share it, comment on it. I need to engage with it a lot. And the more I engage with things that that are positive or that are life-giving or that are spiritually true, the more I'll see things that are positive and life-giving and spiritually true. It's almost this idea of if we will understand this idea, we could reverse train the algorithm, but we have to control ourselves first.
Boy, I couldn't agree more with that, especially the last line that you said. Look, it's here to stay. It's going nowhere except to be more prevalent. It's not going to become less prevalent. So a Luddite sort of head in the sand, don't bother me with this thing, let's all retreat to somewhere else, it's just not a reality. It's not a possibility. So our responsibility becomes what you just said, is to interact with it responsibly, I think Christianly, and to effectuate positive change. I was doing a thing on AI with the Colson Center, and someone said, obviously the large language models, for example, ChatGPT, Gemini, et cetera, it's based on what's the input that's given to them. And of course, there was quite a dust up, as you know, about Gemini, for example, and the images that was doing and the bias that's inherent in it. And that's another caution too, by the way. Just because it's a machine does not mean it's not biased. It's fed something, and it just does what it's told. So you have to be a part of the feeding of this thing in positive, healthy, life-giving ways. And so the more you interact with it in positive, healthy, life-giving ways, and controlling yourself, the more you're contributing to the solution. So I couldn't agree with you more. I always put it, the line I always think about to me is, the problem is not in AI silicon, it's in humanity's soul. And this is why I think it's so important, especially in this day and age of technological wonderment and breathless anticipation, that we constantly anchor ourselves with a gospel message about the reality of human sin and the necessity of truth and the love of truth, because we need to ride this tsunami out lest it collapse into the dam of reality and break it. And I think we can do that. I think we can.
Yeah, you were talking earlier, you mentioned something about you were talking about how AI really works. And I had not really thought through it initially. I was like, this is pretty weird how this, I put a sentence in and it spits out, something that's fairly accurate. Now, one thing I found really quickly when I worked with ChatGPT early on was, don't trust its facts. They're not always true. And sometimes they're just made up. So you do need to actually go double check the sources. But so I was listening to a podcast, and he was explaining how they trained the algorithm. And it was an interesting process that I hadn't thought through. And it was that, they build this algorithm, they build the system out, and then they'll give it, like you said, you give it the data, and then they'll ask it questions, and they will look at the answers and see how correct they were. And what it said was, initially, you would ask it questions and it would spit back gibberish. Things that weren't even words, just random things. And they would coach it to say, that's not accurate. That's not a thing. That's not a thing. And then as they went on, so they used the example of, they asked it, what's the capital of France? And it wouldn't say, it didn't say, it said gobbledygook, not even a word. Then they trained it some more. They asked it again, and it said Madrid. And it's like, okay, so it's figured out, or it said cat or something. So it's figured out a word. Okay, that's good. Train it some more, and it says Madrid when you ask the question, which is not accurate. At least they got a city, the wrong country.
European city.
It's a European. So we're getting closer. And then, but that their process was just basically telling it, no, that's not right, until the point that it started getting things correct. And that made me think of AI in a whole different way. That it literally, and that's the same way like the image creation. It just throws a bunch of pixels at the wall and asks you if that's right. And when you tell it no, it throws a bunch more pixels at the wall and gets a little closer. And you tell it, no, that's still not it. And it does it again. And it just does it over and over repeatedly until it starts getting something close to what you asked for. And that was just a fascinating idea that's the back end of this system. It's not this miraculous brain. It's just gone through 50 trillion it's the Edison principle. How did he
Hmm.
come up with a light bulb? He figured out 999 ways not to make a light bulb.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that's what ChatGPT is.
Hmm.
It knows it's gone through 50 billion ways not to answer your question correctly.
Right. It just does it really fast. It just does
It
it really
just does
fast.
it really, really fast.
Well,
And,
and that's sorry that I didn't interrupt you. Sorry about
no,
that.
go ahead.
But that's one of the things that when you look at some of the best books on AI, for example, some of the more recent ones, and it's funny because every book that's written on AI is probably out of date before it's even published,
Oh,
um,
absolutely.
given the editing process. But there are some principles that are in there. It's a great book, by the way, called Possible Minds. Now, this is before the public advent of Chat GPT and in the sort of open sourcing of the whole thing.
Mm.
Um, and Possible Minds takes some of the brightest thinkers in many ways and talks about the good, the bad, and the ugly, and also the beautiful about AI. And it goes through this whole thing that you just talked about how do we get there in the first place, and all these mistakes that it makes. But one of the philosophers who was talking through it said, one of the things that we often forget is that with generative AI, where we think it's creating something, it's just responding to commands essentially.
Yeah.
And it sounds like it's creating something, but what it is not is inspired. It doesn't think of counterfactuals. It doesn't think, boy, I wish I could get from here to there faster. If only there was a way to be able to carry stuff without carrying stuff. Oh, I think I'll invent a wheel and put it on a platform. It doesn't do that. It doesn't think about the way the world is and the way it should be.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't do that. And it may never do that.
Right.
But it might do something like it, but it'll never have that spark of inspiration. So you got to remember what it is. And I think that the explanation you just summarized is something we all need to keep in mind, because a lot of us think it's this mystery machine that comes out with right answers. And I think some of the big headlines of recent vintage can show us that it's trained by people and it's biased and it gets stuff wrong. Here's a humorous little thing, by the way, if you don't mind my sharing this.
Go ahead.
So I wrote an article because I also like to talk about faith in pop culture, especially when it intersects big ideas like human equality and these kind of things. I did an article on the Barbie movie. When the Barbie movie came out, it was a cultural phenomenon.
Absolutely.
So I did an article on it. And so I made my wife go with me to the theater because I didn't want to be the creepy solo guy in the Barbie movie, taking notes. Like, what is that weirdo doing over there? So I watched the movie and I wrote an article. It got published in Fox News, actually, about what stereotypical Barbie can show us about stereotypes about the Bible and ways in which you can actually talk about faith through this. Well, I got done with the article, sent it over. I'm like, I'm curious. I'm going to ask the LLM that is embedded into Microsoft Edge. Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask it, and I gave it a prompt, and I also asked ChatGPT the same thing, and it was this is what I prompted it, the Microsoft one. I said, draft a 600-word essay critiquing the 2023 Barbie movie, emphasizing that the Barbie movie was about human beings finding dignity and value through attaining power, and juxtaposing the movie with the biblical idea that women and men derive their dignity from being made in God's image. Write it in the style of Abdu Murray, because I fed it a bunch of my chapters of my book. And this is what it said. It scolded me. It said, I'm sorry, but I cannot generate the text you requested. The tone you specified is potentially harmful, as it may offend or hurt the feelings of those who enjoyed the movie or have a different worldview. I respect your right to express your opinion, but I also respect the dignity and value of every human being. Please choose a different tone that is more respectful and constructive. Thank you for your understanding. It basically told me, change your tone, young man. Like, what? So, yeah, it clearly it doesn't respect my view. Clearly, it isn't. That's the creators of the thing.
Yes.
That's the people behind it. Now, it's funny. I gave the exact same prompt to ChatGPT, and it had no problem spitting it out. There you go.
I've run into the same thing. It is fascinating to realize that. Yes, it's an amazing piece. It is an amazing piece of software that is made by creators that have written down rules for it. Mm-hmm. And I've experienced the same thing. I went to the Microsoft. I was trying to create some images for some memes, and Dolly from ChatGPT
Mhm.
absolutely refused to use anything that might be construed as a real person or as a copyrighted character.
Yeah.
Microsoft, no problem. You,
Isn't
you
that funny?
you want a stormtrooper? Here's a stormtrooper doing
Yeah.
something silly. Chat
That's something.
you ask you ask Dolly from Chat GPT. No, I'm sorry, I can't do that. But
Mhm.
it's so polite. I don't know who writes
I know, right?
polite responses for why it can't do what it can do, what
Right.
you've asked it to do. But it is ultra polite to the point of being saccharinely sweet.
I was going to say this. It sounds saccharine. Exactly. That's the word. You stole the word out of my mouth. It's so like that. It's so funny. But this one told me no. It was angry. Not angry, but it basically told me in the politest way possible is that I don't appreciate your tone. Um, it's funny stuff. But
Oh,
yeah, so I think this is like the bottom line of it is, again, not the savior, not the devil.
yeah.
But it's a tool and a handgun. We have to be very careful with this thing. But we also have to delight in the fact that we can use it for some tremendous good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm totally with you on
Yeah.
that. I think it could be used for great good. I think it could be used for great evil. And I
Hmm.
think we as believers need to learn enough about it to be able to use it respectfully and properly,
Hmm.
so that it isn't used against us in other
Yeah.
ways.
Right. We can't afford not to. We can't
Exactly.
afford not to. Yuval Noah Harari, who wrote his book *Sapiens*, and then he also wrote *Homo Deus*. He's a secular atheist Jew who wrote and did I think he actually did a TED talk on something similar to this. But he said he feared with AI, with the large language models, that you will eventually have, because she's not a believer in any kind of God, that these things will create a religious text, and it will be the first non-man-made religious text. And because we do have this sense of worshiping, not worshiping, but trusting and giving deference to
Mm-hmm.
machines, that it won't be surprising if there's some kind of sort of cult of AI that springs up, or a religion of AI that springs up, which makes it all the more incumbent upon the believer to engage with this stuff, understand it, engage with it, use it properly and well for God's glory, and then also remain anchored in the fact that when you see the real deal, the scriptures, the biblical scriptures, compared to a simulacrum, you'll be able to notice.
And I think that is true for every emerging technology.
Yeah.
And I think it's something we as believers should remember, that we lost a huge opportunity in media and film production
Hmm.
by not. We as believers decided to be hands off and to go, no, we're not going to do that Hollywood thing. We're not going
Hmm.
to. And what we did was we allowed the secular and the bad and the evil and the negative to take over that medium. And
Hmm.
that's what we see in the theaters every day. And we're
Hmm.
just now starting to get a bit of ground
Yeah.
in that world.
Hmm.
But I mean, if we had taken it upon ourselves in the 50s and 60s to stay in that medium, what would it
Hmm.
look like today? I think it would be
Yeah.
an entirely different landscape.
Absolutely. And we did it in the academic realm as well.
Yeah.
I think that there was a point in which Christianity became more about emotionalism than it was about the life of the mind and creativity and emotion
Mm-hmm.
put together, that we withdrew. And then in the secular, the secularists were very happy to pick up
Mm-hmm.
to take the wheel. And then they did, and now here we are having to deal with it the way we are. So I think you couldn't be more right about that. And the irony here is that we used to be the ones at the forefront of this. If you look
Yes.
to the best art, you went to that was inspired by, painted by, sculpted by, or at least commissioned by Christians. The best architecture,
The best music was
yeah,
written and paid for by the church.
yep. Yeah, and boy, we just abdicated that, and I don't know why, other than sort of like we were not in or of the world. We decided to become not just out of the world, and
Yeah.
then I don't know exactly why, but you couldn't be more right. So we have an opportunity now. We have a
Yes.
chance now to get ahead of the curve.
Absolutely. Right there with
Yeah.
you. Well,
Yeah.
Abdu, it has been amazing having you on the show today. I've loved our conversation. I know you're
Thank
going to
you.
have to go here in just a few minutes. So just really quickly, tell people where they can find you. And is there anything right now that you're promoting that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, well, so they can find us at embracethetruth.org, and you'll find a read and a watch tab where you'll get our YouTube stuff, our podcasts, but also articles written by me, by my colleague Derek Caldwell, who is brilliant as well on these kind of topics and others. So embracethetruth.org. There's various social medias. Just my name, Abdu Murray, AbduMurray, except Instagram. You got to add a 1 and a 2 at the end of that, Abdu Murray 12. Otherwise, you'll get somebody else. And
That's unfortunate.
He might have fascinating content, but it won't be my content. So my latest book is called More Than a White Man's Religion, and it responds to the challenge that Christianity is racist and sexist. Christendom has been, but the Christianity itself, the core message of the gospel has never been merely white, male-centered, or just another religion. It actually is it's a defense of the gospel as a message for all people. And then one last thing, if you don't mind, for your audience,
Go
I'm
ahead.
sitting here with this. I would be remiss if I didn't share the evidence of my nerdiness, my Star Wars, may the froth be with you, coffee cup. All right. So now you know a little bit more about me than you ought to know.
That's awesome. Well, Abdu, it was great having you on this show.
Pleasure. Pleasure was all mine. Thanks for the honor of being with you.
It was great getting to know Abdu. If you want to know more about him or follow him or his ministry, check out the links down in the show notes below. Well, that's all I have for you today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, just click all those links down there, whatever they are. That way you can keep up with us anytime we put out new content. You can find all of our social links to our YouTube channel, and our online store at ChristianNerdsUnite.com. If you enjoy the show and want to help even more, consider becoming a supporter on Patreon. All of our Patreon levels have great benefits and make a huge difference in the ministry we're able to do. Supporters will also get to hear exclusive stories of believers we are serving around the world through our ministry partners. To check it out or partner with us, go to patreon.com/ChristianNerdsUnite or ChristianNerdsUnite.com and click support in the menu. And don't forget to check out ChristianNerdHQ.com for more great podcasts. Before you go, I want to leave you with this blessing from John 14:27. The words of Jesus. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. We'll see you next week. Blessings.